With us today, we have two leading experts from India, Mr. Satyam Qatari and Mr. Shash Modia. Mr. Qatari is seasoned quality assurance and regulatory affairs executive with over 17 years of experience in R&D, quality assurance, regulatory across devices, pharmaceuticals. He has experience also working with CROs. And Mr. Modia has over 12 years of experience working with multinational companies, and he's worked with companies like Parexel, GE Philips, and he too specializes in regulatory affairs and quality assurance. He's familiar with FDA inspections and ISO certification audits. So both of them very, very good leading experts with extensive years of experience and will bring great insights for us today. So before we begin our discussion today, I'd like to turn our attention to our attendees. Thank you for joining us. At the end of this meeting, we will be holding a short Q&A with the experts in which we encourage your participation. Please refer to the chat box at the right hand of your screen. In the interest of time, please submit your questions throughout the course of our talk, and we'll try our best to address as many of them as we can. So we'll begin. Mr. Qatari, Mr. Modia, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I may refer to both of you by your first names, if that's okay. So let's begin our today's discussion. Satyam, can you please share with us the current state of regulations for medical devices in India?
Sure. Thank you, Priya, for the introduction. Shash and I, we work with Compliable Solutions, and we provide quality assurance and regulatory affairs services globally. We have got extensive experience in drugs and devices compliance, and Shash will lead the responses, and I will support wherever required. So over to you, Shash.
All right, Satyam, thank you. And since we are talking about medical devices, me and Satyam, we are partners, and Satyam is an expert in clinical as well as pharmaceutical side. So since it's a medical device, I'll lead the discussion. So I really appreciate the pleasure of having us over here. And we need to understand the concept of the medical device regulations in India, and that's the first part of our discussion. So currently in India, the central authority for the control of licensing and the compliance for drugs and medical devices is called the CDSCO, which stands for Central Drugs Standards Control Organization. And they have an office in Delhi, which is the capital, India. Now, currently, devices, first of all, it's important to see the classification. That's how the government treats and differentiates between the devices and the control per se to be applied on each one of them. So currently, the devices are classified as notified and non-notified. Also colloquially referred to as regulated or non-regulated. So there are 14 regulated ones, and you can find them on the CDSCO website if you Google it. Now, all this is the current scenario we are talking about, mind you. So essentially, the regulated ones are the high-risk devices, such as the stents and heart valves. For the low risk ones, which are more less in number, as it stands currently, there are no stringent laws to introduce these devices in India and getting to sell them. So specifically, if a country wants to import medical devices into India, it would need, first of all, whether it's notified or non-notified, it needs an authorized person with an address and a scope of work in India. This means that you either set up an India Private Limited, a sister concern of your company in India, or you have a distributor with an agreement or a partner company. Now, essentially, what this company does, your sister entity, your partner, it's called the authorized person in India, it raises invoice to bring the devices into India so that you can sell within India. So you need an authorized person, one thing. Second thing, you need an invoice. You need an import license for the regulated ones. For the non-regulated ones, you do not need an import license. And you need a CE marking or the user manual, which essentially is the bearer device, what this device is all about. So these are the basic requirements as it stands today.
Thank you so much. Now let's move our discussion to these new regulations that have come out. Well, only the draft guidance has come out. So can we talk about that? So what can device manufacturers, our attendees, expect from the new regulations?
Right. So, if a half a day is not enough to understand any country regulation, so I can give a quick synopsis of what this new regulation is going to look like and what to expect out of it. And again, this is only going to be a strategic overview of the device. We won't be able to go into like the nitty-gritty details as what is the form number and what to submit, when, those kind of things. So, under these new regulations, the first and foremost thing is that the notified, non-notified, this distinction is going to go away. Everything is going to be class-based. And if you are aware of GHTF, the Global Harmonizing Task Force, you can Google it, and their classification guidelines of class A, B, C, and D. That is what is going to be followed, D being the most high risk, highly invasive, such as heart valves and stents, those kind of devices, and class A being the risky. So this will be the first and foremost change. Also, this a little bit about this regulation, which is a new regulation. It is in the draft stage. We have received this draft published in October 2016, and it is still under discussion with the industry and the regulators. But there is some momentum towards it, and so we may see some action in 2017 year itself. So just to give you a gist of what this regulation is going to look like, you will need an import license for all the classes, and also a manufacturing license if you not just want to import it, but also maybe start manufacturing within India. So that will be one change. If you're already an importer, there is a time limit in which you will have to start applying to these regulations. You already would have a license. So up to the point that your license expires, you should apply for the new license under the new regulation, along with the due fees. And within 18 months of whenever this regulation is active, you should be able to comply to the new regulation. Now, once granted this license under this new regulation frame of mind, you will have this license valid as long as you keep paying registration fee and keep your registration active every 5 years. In between, there will be the license documentation that you have to maintain, and you will be audited. Even as part of granting the license, you will be audited. If you are class A and B, you will be audited by a notified body, which is an outsourced function hired by the government, CDSCO. And if you are class C or D, you will be audited directly by someone called as a medical device officer. Now, I know I'm just going swiftly to all these terms. You can take notes, and these are the terms and you will have to keep in mind when the rubber hits the road, that who is the device officer, what's a notified body. So we are going pretty swiftly on this one. So okay, audit is one part. Now, if you are into clinical studies, Satyam is the expert on it, and we may touch more into it. But if you are looking into clinical studies, then there's a different license that you need to apply for, different fees, and it's a chapter in itself. Further, what other things, for instance, you are expecting is UDI. I don't know how many of you are familiar with UDI, unique device identifier, and that system will be also is thought to be implemented. So that any medical device that is going in the territory of India would be known what is it doing, what is the class, and what is the intended use of that device. There will be shelf life requirements, which should not exceed for more than 5 years when imported. Adverse event reporting is also a requirement, 15 days within the date of knowledge. So these are some of the requirements that you will see, and you will need to comply to. In the current scenario, just to go back a little bit, for class A and B, we do not have very stringent rules realized for those devices. Last but not the least, there are also some exemptions which are not extensive, but anything that is custom made, or any device that is made for one specific patient, those can be exempted and can be applied for an exemption. We can go more into detail into the fees and all that if anyone is interested, or time permits. But as of now, this is in a nutshell what the new regulation is going to look like.
Great. Well, thank you. I know it's a very broad question, but thank you for at least addressing some of the main points of the regulations. So I know you touched upon clinical trials. So Satyam, could you actually, for attendees, their device manufacturers whose classes devices may fall into class C or D and may require clinical trials. Can you just briefly touch upon what this draft guidance says about clinical trial requirements?
Sure, Priya. So at present, the regulations in India around the requirements for clinical trials are not clear. Most of the times they are discussed with the regulatory authority on a case-by-case basis, and the authority also makes the decision based on the discussion, based on the submitted data. But this will change with the new regulation. The draft regulation at the moment has very clear requirement, and which will be the future requirement for the expectation around clinical trials for devices. The draft states that no clinical trials are required in India for class A and class B devices. You are importing from any country, you do not need to conduct any clinical trial in India for class A and class B devices. However, if your device falls into class C and class D, then there is a distinction. If you are an importer from the list of countries, and that list includes US, European Union, Australia, Canada, and Japan. So if you are an importer from any of these countries, you are an importer of class C and D device, you still do not require any clinical trial in India. However, if you are an importer from any other country than the listed countries, and you want to import a class C or D device, then you may be asked to provide data supporting the safety and performance of the device, or you may be asked to provide the clinical trial data from the country of origin. That means if you are importing if you are manufacturing a device in South Africa, for example, uh, and if you apply for the license in India, you may be asked to submit the clinical trial data conducted in South Africa. So this is how it's going to be in future, and which will probably make it very clear now to the importers whether they will require a clinical trial in India or not. I hope this is clear.
That's good. You bring up some great points, and at least it provides overarching clarity to our attendees. So now let's get into just some quick information, some additional knowledge about the new draft. So can we talk about labeling? Question always comes up, is labeling accepted in English, or does the manufacturer have to translate the instructions for use in different regional languages? So do we need to, as a foreign manufacturer, is English acceptable for labeling, or do we need to translate the labeling into different languages?
I think English is accepted. There is no requirement for regional or different languages other than English.
Okay, well, that's great. So the labeling needs to be in English. If you're a foreign manufacturer, you don't have to worry about translating the IFUs in different regional languages. As you know, India, every state has its own language. Now, can we talk about the approval time? So with the new guidance in place, how long will the approval time take?
The approval, yeah. So the approval time will vary with the complexity of the device. The regulators are still on the learning curve, and at the same time, how the new regulations will be interpreted, that will also be a challenge in the initial phase. So if the device is not very complex, and it's safe and it's registered in the country of origin, for example, it may take few weeks to get the approval. But at the same time, if it is a complex device, and there is a lot of concern around the safety and effectiveness of that device, it may take few months to obtain the approval. So it really depends upon the complexity and how much data you can submit in support of the application.
Okay. So the main question that I'm sure everyone has is, when will the new regulations come into effect?
What we discussed is the draft regulation, and it is the second draft, and which, as I said, was published in October 2016. Now, the first draft was issued back in June 2016. However, these regulations have been under discussion for a long time, maybe 4 or 5 years now. But we had in June the first draft, and by October we had the second draft. So there is definitely some bit of momentum into it, and it has been actively discussed with the industry experts and the regulators. And so there is in India, it might the red tape might take a little time, but as I said, there is some momentum, and we should see some kind of an action in 2017. So stay tuned, and we at Compliable Solutions, we are on it, and as soon as we get some information, all our partners will hear it first from us.
So lastly, before we get into the Q&A, and there have been lots of questions coming through, can you, Sash, perhaps since you ended the conversation, any parting tips for device manufacturers?
Sure. See, first and foremost, it might come as to a lot of the audiences. One parting tip would be that be compliant to ISO 13485 2015. So if you're complying to ISO 13485, the chances of you being aligned to the expectation of the Indian regulation tremendously increases. So that's one thing. And the other thing, other tip which comes to my mind is have a very, very good sound communication channel with your Indian partners, whether it's an Indian entity or any kind of consultation that you are doing, because it's not going to be because you don't have a good quality system that your application gets rejected or goes into some kind of a loop. But it will be more of a knowing what exactly to file and doing it right the first time and verifying all the essential documents are attached. So it's more of the paperwork that that would be hassle rather than having a sound system or not, quality wise. So that from my side, Satyam, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I would recommend that if your device falls in class C or class D, then it is high time that you start looking at the new draft regulation and try assessing it how you are going to comply with the different requirements. There is definitely going to be a transition period, and it is in the draft regulation. And I can see there is a question around the transition period. So there will be a transition period, but if it is a class C or class D device, and if you are not manufacturing in one of those countries, you may be asked to provide safety or efficacy data for the devices, and that means it will take a long time if you do not have that kind of data. So I think it's high time for particularly the manufacturers or importers of class C or class D devices, review the requirements, assess your compliance, and start preparing for the new application whenever the regulations are final and published in the Gazette. That's what I would like to recommend.
Thank you so much. And let's get right into Q&A because there are a lot of questions. Let's begin with our first question. I know we didn't touch upon IVDs. The question is regarding IVDs, do they fall under the non-notified currently?
See, I'll give a blanket answer for this one. So currently, if you want to know the notified ones, there are 14 of them. Please, I recommend going to the CDSCO website and identifying the all the 14 the devices. If it's not the 14 device that you have, then it's non-notified.
Now, can we actually quickly, a great question, and I know a lot of viewers will have this, is mobile medical apps. Are they regulated in India?
Not at the moment. The Indian government is still working on some of these aspects. For example, right now, the government is drafting a regulation for online pharmacies. And still they are learning how to regulate the software aspects. So the mobile medical applications, no, not regulated in India right now, as far as
okay. And then what about with the new guidance that's draft that's out? Does that cover mobile medical devices, or has the government not really identified them as a category?
No, it is I think considered while drafting this new regulation, and they have defined a certain class of softwares which will be regulated by this new regulation. And I would suggest have a look at the draft and determine whether the app falls under that definition or not.
Mm-hmm. Another great question is regarding the UDIs, so unique device identification. Now, it's required for products in the US, for US FDA. Can you cover that? Will the new guidance document, will they cover UDI? And then what is the timeline in terms of implementing that? Is it going to be, do you project it to be 2018 or much further as in 2020?
So UDI is definitely a requirement for Class C and D, and I do not know where the year 2018 and 2020 have come into picture, but whenever the regulations get implemented, yes, this will be an implementation that will be mandated. So I don't think there's a clear-cut timeline for us to meet the requirement, and if there is a leeway that is provided, but there's nothing 2018 or 2020 about it. It's when the regulation formally get introduced, and then we will have to start complying to the UDIs.
Okay, understood. What about, we didn't cover actually in our conversation with the current regulations, when the new ones come into effect, and of course we don't know when exactly that'll be, but then can you tell us the impact on the devices that are currently in the market? How long do you project, or does the draft guidance actually state the time that the manufacturers will have to take their current products that are already being sold in India and then get those regulated if they're currently non-regulated?
Yes, so there is a guidance a section dedicated to this one in the new regulation draft, and if you are already selling, you will have to you're granted time until your current license expires. So, and if it expires, let's say on the 1st of February 2017, if this regulation is into effect, but if your device is licensed up to December 2017, then you're good up to December 2017. So you have time up to when your license expires, the current license. And but if your license is expiring much later, then there is also a time limit to this one. So you have 18 months to switch to the new regulation. So it's a little convoluted when you read the regulation, but in essence, this is what it means. So you do have a time limit set.
So it will be good to have a look at the draft regulation, which is available on the CDSCO website. It is available in English. So if there are initial pages which are in Hindi language, the national language. But if you go further down, the entire draft is available in English, and it defines the time period the importers will have to comply with the new regulations.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We have met our time of 30 minutes, and we want to be cognizant of it.